Morning, my friends. Welcome to another installment of the Fat Man GM's revisitation of Middle-earth role-playing game known as MERP, produced by Iron Crown Enterprises in the 80s. Shows you how old I am, right? Sad. This is one of the more important source books of all the stuff in the game material. I think this is in the top 5, called The Rangers of the North. Also known as the Kingdom of Arthedain. As source books go, traditionally typical of the era, much thinner, as I pointed out before. Looks more like a module by today's standards, as opposed to, say, our traditional, typical modern day version of a source book, right? But it is what it is. They actually pack a lot of material into these things. The artwork is still pretty good. The map work is awesome. They did their homework, right? Okay. Now, what sets this one apart from most of the others? First off, it gives you a better understanding of Arnor proper, Arthedain, the Splinter Kingdom. It also includes a chapter on the history of the Dunedain, of the Numenorean people, including Numenor itself, the rise, the fall, includes a map of the island of where these people descended from. It goes on with in the Numenorean culture, the rise of the Numenorean might, founding of the realms in exile, the downfall. Now, this piece here, chapter 5.12, the founding of the realms in exile. It says, by the grace of the valor, Eladil and 9 ships of the faithful escaped the tumultuous downfall of Numenor, set sail for exile on Middle-earth. With them they bore a few priceless treasures, including the seedling of the sacred white tree, symbol of valor, the 7 Palantir granted to the Dunedain long ago, the faithful ride of the Grey Havens to split forces, Eladil sailing north up the River Lund, the Blue River, to establish the northern realm in exile, Arnor, while the sons Isidore and Anorian sailed south of the Bay of Belfalis and up the Unaden to the found Gondor, or the Stone Land. Although the Dunedain were spread thin, the establishment of 2 separate distinct kingdoms bettered their chances of survival, for it was clear that the men who went to the north with Eladil were fundamentally and temperamentally different than those who settled in Gondor. Now, okay. First off, let's think about that for a second. That's 9 ships. I don't know how big these ships were, but even if you go by some of the largest sailing vessels of the British Empire, of its heart, the height of its sailing, 1,000 people, maybe at most, crammed on board one of these huge behemoths, if that's what they were. Let's just say a few hundred. So we've come in with 1,000, maybe a little more than 1,000 people total. And these are pure-blooded Numerians, Dunedain. Now, the lion bulk of these are members of what will become the royal families, the bloodline of the kingdoms in exile, and their loyal retainers and their families. So, the core of the Anorian and Gondorian nobility come in on these 9 ships. But it's mentioned in backstory in both the game material, but also, more importantly, in J.R. Tolkien's novels at the back of book 3 in the appendix sections, I think. It implies, that the Numenoreans have been settling these lands of Middle-earth for 1,000+ years. So they're already enclaves and groups of Dunedain already well established in these areas. So they just accept Eladil, Isidore, and Anorian as their leaders of, since the original bloodline. These guys some of them are blood ties to the kings of Numenorean, Numenor, and so they have some claim. The Numenoreans themselves, the king's bloodline in Numenor is destroyed when Arthedain makes the stupid mistake of listening to Sauron and invading the Undying Lands, pretty much destroying, Numenor as a country completely. It's J.R. Tolkien's take on Atlantis, the Atlantis myth. That's how I take it away. That's what I took away from it, right? Anyway, so in the Rangers of the North, it's more focused on Arthedain and in directly Arnor. The Gondor's just mentioned, so you know they're connected, obviously. And we go to the Kingdom of Arnor, the birth of the Arthedain, Carla and the Sworder, the Swinter kingdoms. Then we got a section on Arthedain culture. Now, once again, and it was mentioned in that piece I just read, that what sets the Arnorian Dunedain apart from their southern brethren is that they tend to be more traditionally bound. They cling to that Numerian ideology of mimicking or idolizing the high elves, and so while the true-born Dunedain at this time were long-lived. They could live upwards of 400 or 500 years, and thus they took the long road, the long view of things. A lot of these folks were more interested in scholarly pursuits, researching scientific development, studying the stars and astrology and astronomy and excuse me and less about war and conquest and the martial pursuits, much to their disadvantage later down the road. And then there's far more. There's just not as many pure-blooded Dunedain in the north as there are in the south, and so the thriving larger kingdom of Gondor is the bulk of the Dunedain population and defense, where Arnor is more of its soul in some aspects, much to its disadvantage in the later centuries when they're basically ground down over years and centuries of conflict with first enemies from the east, from these tribes from the east that keep trying to move west, and then the development of Angmar and the kingdom of the Witch-king, which is basically, you know, the head Nazgul and the pawn of Sauron, who wants to see one of the two kingdoms totally destroyed as possible. So, Arthedain culture, the social structure, Arthedain scattered people, Arthedain warcraft, and then it talks about some of the other human, lesser human blood, you know, people that hang the Colossus, the Dunlandings, so on and so forth, that make up the bulk of the common people of the country. Let's see. The Arthedain scattered peoples outside the capital of Fornost and many scattered military outposts. Most of Arthedain's remaining population spread south in a fan-like shape from Fornost towards the Weather Hills and the upper reaches of the Brandywine. Their numbers never great, but are a fraction of what they once were. Now the beautiful hills of Evenum are deserted and only a few clans live to the west. So, in some aspects, I always envisioned the way these people settled was two major in the north in Arthedain, because if you add Cardinal and Radur in there, then you've got some more cities. But for the most part, there's two major cities of any large towns of any significant size. One is Fornost, and the other one is Atheus. I cannot pronounce the name of that town. They use some which would have been their capital at the time. I get tongue twisted on some of these names. I'm sorry. It is what it is. After that, they didn't settle in large, you know, you don't have villages and towns scattered all over the place like you do down in Gondor. Up here, I think it was more along the lines of what would you call it? The estate mindset, the great farming operation looking things like you see in elements of Rome and Greece back in the day, where you've got a semi fortified farmstead that might hold 40 or 50 people, and there might be a Dunedain family here, and then their working subjects or whatever, and scattered about in various locations, mostly because of the beauty of the territory, not so much about its defensibility and or its ability to sustain itself in a financial perspective. I said only a few clans live in the far west near the elven-controlled Tower Hills, while the rivermen of the Brandywine possess the wisdom to avoid trouble with the Arthedain and tend to leave the higher men to their own devices. They have no trouble jealously guarding the river as their own. For a few of the northern Dunedain bother, and they remain unsubjected by ever dwindling Arthedain and provide the high men keep off the Brandywine or pay required tolls of traveling river. Conflict is rare. Given their sparse numbers, the Arthedain pay little attention to those at peace within their borders. Instead, they mind the shrinking kingdom itself. By 1640, Angmar seized and controlled a good chunk of eastern Arthedain. The question is, however noble their cause, or how long can the so few hold out against so many? And that's the deal. See, you just have this seed of Numenor culture, and there was never a large base of it to begin with. And unlike their southern brethren in Gondor, who grew in size, Arnor never really grew. It's remained stagnant to some degree, and then through conflict and through relocation over time, its royal men, its high men presence dwindled, and the common men, the Dunlandings and the Losses and the others, tribes of lesser men who lived in the region, who lived in the Arnor long before the Dunedain came, continued doing their thing, and wasn't overly sad to see these people, these high-minded yahoos leave. So it is what it is. So we, like I said, then we break off the weather and the losses. This is the, their version of kind of like Eskimo. They're this tribe of people that live way in the north. Brelanders, the Dunlandings, Rivermen of the Northern Waters, which is actually a culture, but not as much a culture as it is a lifestyle, I guess. The Hobbits of the Shire. This is the only supplement we get that has any significant information on the Shire and the Hobbits. The origin of destiny, the founding of the Shire, the journey into Eredor. Not a lot in there. The King's Messengers. We got politics and power in Arthedain, Chapter 6. Wars with the Witch-king. The Great Invasion of 1409. Arthedain military structure. Petty wars between the little kingdoms, politics of war, politics of the royal court, others in the royal court, places of note, the two capitals, Fornost. It's Annuminas, Annuminas. You all pronounce it. Weather hills, weathertop, breeze, so on and so forth. Got some nice little maps. This book actually comes with a very beautiful color map that's about yay big, and it's up here in overhead somewhere, I believe, or it's in my storage locker. I'm not sure. I know I saw it not long ago. Talks about the Grey Havens. Gives an example of a small village called the village of Rood, Rood. The fall of Arthedain, tenuous ties to Gondor, the flight of the king, the Lost Kingdom, and the Rangers. Now, I mentioned this in the standalone entry under my Breakfast with the Fat Man, Aragorn, the Ranger, and why it's important that he's a Ranger. This reinforces that. No longer rulers of a nation, Arthedain's princes miraculously managed to carry on the line of Isildur. Now called chieftains, the princes are raised and educated by the Elves of Rivendell, led by Elrod. Arnulf's family relocates to Elfhaven, tucked between the Lost Redir and the western spires of the Misty Mountains. There they reunite many of their heirlooms of the Arthedain, those carried in secret to Rivendell before the death of the North Kingdom, so on and so forth. The chieftains and their fellows prepare for the long road to renewal and assume the guise of nobles and time-honored Arthedain frontiersmen, becoming the Rangers of the North. Traditionally follows the chieftain training, the schooling of Rangers of the North. So, Rangers carried an unbroken line at Isdor through the chaos of the Third Age and into the promising of the Fourth. Although they lack a state to govern, the leaders of the Rangers, who called themselves chieftains, were nonetheless royal in bearing and breeding, regardless of their woodsy apparel and suspicious demeanor. Besides battling orcs and other servants of evil, the Rangers established and maintained watchtowers and observatories in the frontiers, and sheltered the heirlooms of the northern Dunedain and the Elven haven of Rivendell. In fact, the Eldar gathered at Rivendell sometimes rode with the Rangers, risking their lives as well. Granted a longer lifespan than that of their brethren in Gondor, the secretive Rangers preserved and overcame, preserving themselves as a political and military entity for a millennia. See, this is what I said briefly in my dissertation on Aragon, or diatribe, depending on how you look at it. The reason the fact that he's a ranger as a political title, not as a character class, although he is considered a ranger in that aspect, but as a political title, this allowed him legitimacy. This was the last element of the Arnorian government, if you will, to exist. The only one that existed through the time of the dissolution of the country. So it's from this that he has legitimacy, and it backs his claim, not just that he can say, I'm the descendant of Isildur, blah, 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 but I've bled and sweat and shed tears in the service of the Dunedain people, the peoples of the north, the defunct Arnor as a kingdom. I earned the right to be considered leadership material, right? So on. Nice little pictures of some of these fellows. Like I said, there's a lot of information packed into a small book. And we've got Aragon in the second and the Ring Quest, the Fourth Age. We've got the Dunedain timeline, so we got an actual breakdown by year of important things that have occurred over the millennia. Then we get into the late Third Age, Bilbo and Frodo. We've got, here's our stats for Aragon, and imagine, as I said, some of the important elves and Gandalf's in here. Gandalf's ring. Nara seems not to have the power of other ring. Nara, Narya. Anyway, Gandalf the Grey, Aragon the Second. Aragon the Second was son of Arathorn, Dunedain Ranger, I.E. Strider. Born in 2931, the only son of Gilron and Arathon II, raised in the haven of Rivendell till his 20th birthday. For the next 80 years, so he's over 100 years old in the War of the Ring. For the next 80 years, Aragon travels the roads of Middle-earth, often serving the armies of Rohan and Gondor in the guise of lesser men. Much of his time is spent also commanding the Dunedain Rangers, who patrol the north, keeping it safe for unsuspecting people such as the hobbits of the Shire. He walks everywhere he goes because of his height, 6'9". He has a very long stride. In appearance, Aragon is tall and relatively slender, although he possesses the strength of the Numerian heir. He is well concealed. As such, he is often considered a shady fellow by many who do not guess his purpose or identity. And that was important because the dark forces knew, servants of the dark forces knew that he existed. They'd have been after him. They'd have hunted him down, and it would eventually got him just by sheer perseverance and attrition. So it gets into some adventure ideas. Terror among the tomes, the library, and a Numinous, intrigue in Fornost, the frontier fight to strike a blow against Angmar, quest for the lost stones, defending the frontier. Then you got your, an outpost, blueprints, that kind of stuff. Village, village material here. Nice little village, and so, like I've said numerous times, these are also excellent pieces to borrow to use in other games as ready-made locations and or supplements to one of your own adventures, so to speak. Now, like I said, probably one of the top 5 important must-have source books for this game. If you want to play this game well, you need this book, in part because it is the heart and soul description of Arnor and Arthedain and what goes on in the north. And if you're going to adventure up there, even in the Lord of the Rings era, where most of this is just history and ruin, the information is still viable because it gives you a lot of stuff to fill in the blanks, so to speak. Very good book. I've used it heavily over the years. It shows a lot of wear. I've read it numerous times just for the sake of reading. I buy these things if I'm not going to read them. So, Rangers of the North, the Kingdom of Arthedain. Enjoy it, like it, hate it, snub it, ignore it, whatever.